Good afternoon, Bradley here. Today I just have a couple albums, a couple jazz albums that I've gotten in the last month, and I really like these. These are good. So stay tuned. The first album, it is a Blue Note 80th series. It's Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, Buhaina's Delight. So you might have heard me say before, if Art Blakey ever made a bad album, I don't have it. Any Art Blakey album, to me, is a good one. And this continues that tradition. Okay, this is, of course, on Blue Note. Now, this was recorded in November and December of '61, but not released until maybe a year and a half later in July of '63. Now, by that time, Blakey and the Jazz Messengers had moved to the Riverside label, where they would do, I think, 3 albums for them. So this was put out. They might have already been on Riverside by this time. So in the time frame, I'll give you a time frame of this album. Like I said, it was released in '63. This was the previous album, right before it. It's Mosaic. And then, of course, we had the Buhaina's Delight. And then the one after that would be a Riverside album, Three Blind Mice. So I'll briefly go over the players on this album, which the ones on this are exactly the same as Mosaic. And this may be my favorite lineup of the Jazz Messengers, although they had several good lineups over the years. So of course you got Art Blakey on drums, Freddie Hubbard trumpet, Wayne Shorter tenor sax, Curtis Fuller trombone, Cedar Walton piano, and Jimmy Merritt on bass. Now the title, Buhaina's Delight. I believe Art Blakey's Muslim name was Buhaina, although professionally he went by Art Blakey. Now this, I was reading on the back on the liner notes on this, just something a little interesting. So the previous year before this was recorded, the Jazz Messengers must have went out to LA for a series of dates, and Art Blakey was he was very disappointed by the reception they received. Seemed like everybody was talking during their set, and nobody was paying attention to him. So anyhow, the following year, they went back to Los Angeles for a series of dates right before this album was made. And the people were receptive. They listened to the music and they loved it. The audience loved it. So that made Art feel good. And at this time, Art said, "This is music you can dance to." And he said they were also getting some college dates, which was really cool to open up a little younger audience. So that's very cool. I'll just briefly go over these 6 songs to give you a flow of how this album is. Like I said, it's a typical Jazz Messenger album. Now on the first song you have Backstage Sally, which was written by Wayne Shorter. Kind of a light swing. Now the next one, I believe, and I think this is what's playing in the background. It's called Contemplation. That was also written by Wayne Shorter. and kind of one of his moody type songs, little balladish. Then they end up the first side with a Curtis Fuller composition, the title tune called Booze Delight. Very upbeat, lots of drum rolls in this, very energetic, and Art has, I don't know, 4 or 5 minute drum solo. And towards the end of it, he gets really, really frenetic. He is blazing away. Then on the second side, you have another Wayne Shorter composition called Reincarnation Blues. A great Curtis Fuller solo is in here. He calls it blues. I don't know. I don't know if I see blues in this song, but whatever. Now the next song is Shaky Jake, which was written by the pianist Cedar Walton. Great song, has really nice Freddie Hubbard trumpet solos in here. Now the last song on this album, remember this was recorded in '61, the end of '61. Well, the song is Moon River, which today we call that a standard. But actually Moon River was, I think that was released either in late '60 or '61. So Moon River was basically a current song back then. So I guess they didn't know it would become a standard, although it was so good they probably had an idea that it would be. So they were probably one of the first groups and artists to re-record Moon River. I'm sure, I would say I'm pretty sure about that. Done in like a very upbeat tempo, in jazz. You know, it's not the slow version. So, Buhaina's Delight, Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. If you happen to be into Art Blakey, you're going to love it, you know. And like I said, this version of the Jazz Messengers is probably my favorite combination of musicians, although over the over the years they had like Clifford Brown and I think Lee Morgan and just everybody in there, and then they would leave to start their own careers. So it was kind of like an incubation area for young jazz musicians. So that is a very good album. The next album, and last, this was on Prestige. Actually, they had a label back then called Swingville. Jazz, of course. It is Nighthawk with none other than Coleman Hawkins. And if you can read the print up there, with Eddie Lockjaw Davis. So like I said, this was on Prestige, recorded at the end of 1960 and released the following year in '61. It's got Coleman Hawkins and Eddie Lockjaw Davis both play tenor sax. Then you've got Tommy Flanagan on piano, Ron Carter on bass, and Gus Johnson on drums. So it's a quintet, but it's got 2 tenor saxes, the only horns. Now this album, I got this probably a month or 2 ago, and this was not a groundbreaking record at all. What it is, it's just really enjoyable. Just, pure enjoyment listening to this. Both of these sax players, they could blow pretty good. So you might say it's a blowing session. And I don't think I'd disagree with that statement. Coleman Hawkins had a very powerful breath or whatever. He could blow really hard. And Eddie Lockjaw Davis, he was similar in style. So he was no slouch either. He could blow really good too. And I think as far as Coleman Hawkins, in my opinion, he had the most beautiful vibrato for a sax player that I ever heard. When he gets in those lower notes, he could get that perfect slow vibrato, you know, where you could hear the reed and actually hear his breath and all that. So this is excellent album. You know, like I said, it's just very enjoyable. You know, and there were 5 songs on here. I'll only go over 2 of them. One was an Ellington tune. Anyhow, the first song on the record is the title track called Nighthawk, and that was written by Coleman Hawkins. This is a slow blues. It's a pretty long, pretty long song. I think about 10 minutes. So you have Coleman Hawkins and Eddie Lockjaw Davis. They're trading leads, and with their phrasing, maybe Coleman will start out, and Eddie Davis will complete the phrase and go on like that. Good harmony. Sounds really good. And then the second song is There Is No Greater Love. It continues just trading really good licks, saxophone licks and harmony. So, like I said, this was originally on Swing Bill. It was Rudy Van Gelder production or engineer. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, it was on Prestige Swing Bill. This is an OJC repress, which sounds very good. I've always been happy with OJC represses, especially the 80s and 90s, but this is a pretty new repress. Sounds good. So, let's finish this with the little Art Blakey drum solo. If you can hear that. Anyhow, that's all I have to say today. I'll catch you folks later. So, have a good one. See ya.